the one, the only. Hello, sir.
How are you, Steve?
I'm good. Oh, I always get excited when I'm going to talk to you because I know you're probably wearing Converse or Keds or PF Flyers or something.
$5 a pair, my man.
Yeah. Look, when I was a kid, my son says, "What? How old are you?" I said, "When I was a kid, a slice of pizza was 25 cents."
Less than a pack of cigarettes is about 20%. A gallon of gas, you could get 4 or 5 gallons for $1. Also, 1 6-pack of beer.
And that's the important thing, of course. All right, you just heard that little montage, but I want to talk about something that more important than any of that nonsense that MSNBC spews on a regular basis, and that is, and you wrote a great piece about this, the new Blacklist, what happened to the Mozilla CEO, a man who invented JavaScript. Without whom we probably couldn't do a lot that we do on this show, and people couldn't do a lot of what they do every day on their computer. A man who helped co-found Mozilla, and he became CEO, and they kicked him out because he gave a legal contribution to a legal cause that won at the ballot 6 years ago. I mean, this is vicious.
Well, it is the new Blacklist, and there's a way of silencing dissent and attacking dissent. And this is, quite frankly, the way of the militant gay rights movement, as it's called. And that's what they went after a guy because he stood up against them, and he stood up with the majority of Californians at that time. He was holding a position held up until about a year ago by the President of the United States, one which all the old and great religions still adhere to today. And he made a public contribution of $1,000 to that cause, and for it, he's been driven out of a position which he earned by his tremendous achievements. It speaks a lot about the state of America in 2014.
It does. And you know, where is it going to stop? I mean, he's not the first one. We have Bill Maher saying that there's a gay mafia, and of course he could say anything he wants because he's a liberal. There's another double standard and whatnot. But it is frightening because we know that Al Sharpton could get you fired if you say something that he doesn't like about race. But now we also know that very, very likely, I mean, look at the pressure they put on Jan Brewer not to sign that bill that was on her desk. The NFL, for crying out loud, threatened to take the Super Bowl away. That wasn't by accident.
Well, I mean, they threatened to take the Super Bowl away if Arizona didn't capitulate and have a Martin Luther King holiday,
right.
And that was about 2 or 3 decades ago. Look, every establishment, once it ensconces itself in power, finds out ways and means to silence challengers and silence dissent and purge people that disagree with it, all the way down through history, starting with Socrates, who they made to take poison for, quote, corrupting the young.
Yeah. Well, you know, you said ways and means, so you gave me a natural segue. So I think I'm gonna use it. And of course, yesterday the Ways and Means Committee of the House, Pat, the IRS scandal, that recommendation goes to the Justice Department. And don't make me laugh. Yeah. And of course, today the House Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, a couple of things. One, in contempt. Now the House will probably vote on that, and she will be held in contempt. But again, I don't know what that's going to mean.
I don't know what it means either. I mean, you've got a situation where, look, the Attorney General of the United States and the President of the United States decide which laws, once passed, they're going to enforce. The Defense of Marriage Act, they say, well, we think we're just not going to use resources to enforce that. Can you imagine what would happen if a conservative president told his Attorney General, just don't enforce the civil rights laws? People would go bananas in this country. I mean, we cease to be under a rule of law if the people who have sworn to uphold those laws won't do it.
No, and you're absolutely right. They could do it on any single law just the way they're doing it now, whether they're doing it now, as you mentioned, with Defense of Marriage, they're doing it with immigration and deportation, they're doing it with the Welfare Act that Clinton signed. I mean, they're just doing it haphazardly. And, of course, not to mention the least of which, or the most of which, is Obamacare. You know, every day another dictate.
Obamacare, he sits over there in the second floor of the White House and rewrites the law every so often. And then says, look, we're going to change this, we're going to change that, we're going to change this doesn't apply for a year. I mean, you at least at one point in America, you couldn't do that. But clearly what all this is doing is undermining the respect for law generally and letting your own people off the hook when they do things like Lois Lerner did. And the point is that permeates the society in both parties, and eventually you're going to get down to the point where the party in power does what it pleases.
Yeah, and now we have a report also from the House Oversight Committee today showing that staff working for the ranking member of that committee, Elijah Cummings, communicated with the IRS multiple times between 2012 and 2013 about this group True the Vote, a conservative group that was targeted by the IRS. And ICE is accusing Cummings of working to circumvent all this with Lois Lerner and the IRS.
Well, you know, if it's in the House of Representatives like that, I mean, that ought to be something they could send on to the Ethics Committee itself of the House. And while you couldn't prosecute him because the Attorney General won't prosecute one of his own people, you could certainly censure him in a certain way in the House of Representatives. That's been done many times before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, you give me a segue. I mean, Eric Holder yesterday speaking at Al Sharpton's group. It was his turn to kiss the ring of Sharpton. I think tomorrow or soon it's going to be Obama's turn, believe it or not. The recently exposed alleged FBI informant, Al Sharpton, who says he's no rat. Anyway, Eric Holder.
And he's a hero, as I recall.
Yeah, well, yes. Eric Holder, though, has said yesterday, and we played it 3 times already, but he said that no Attorney General, look how they're treating me, and look how they're treating Barack Obama. You know, is it any coincidence? In other words, because we're black. Now, you've served presidents and you've worked with attorney generals, and Ari Fleischer was on with us before. He said, look how they treated Gonzalez and Bush, calling them war criminals.
Yeah, Alberto Gonzalez. Look, frankly, how they treated Janet Reno on Waco, or things like that. I mean, she was hammered, but the idea that Eric Holder is getting some dreadful treatment because of who he is or what he is ridiculous. I mean, we are in a very tough environment. I can remember what happened to Clarence Thomas, who was an African-American Republican named to the Supreme Court, was torn to pieces. Robert Bork, that's a classic. It's made into a verb, borking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And the next one after that was something I won't mention right now that I could recall, but it involved the Oval Office. All right, let's move on to national affairs, Pat. And
sure.
You know, where the heck are we with Putin? It seems like any day he's just going to go further into Ukraine.
Well, if he sends the Russian army into Ukraine, I think he will have crossed his own Rubicon, and he will force the Europeans and the others to impose the back-and-forth sanctions, which will be damaging to everybody, to the Crimea, to the Ukraine itself. When he demands payment for his gas, and to Europe when he cuts that off, and into Russia when they sink the banks and all the rest of it, an economic war in which both sides will suffer. I'm not sure he's going to go into Ukraine. I do think that if the Ukraine began cutting off the electricity and the oil and the water and all the rest of Crimea, he would be forced to go in and grab a land bridge. But I don't believe right now that he's going to cross the border with his troops, and it looks like these grabbing of buildings looks like a Putin imitation, but it's not working. It doesn't look like there's any rallying of support, and it doesn't look like there's broad, closer ties to Russia. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, if they get those, as long as they maintain their independence. So I'm not as alarmed right now at the situation as other people are. And I do think, the last analysis, when General Eisenhower wouldn't lift a finger or fire a rifle in defense of the Hungarian rebels because he said they're on the other side of the frontier. We're not going to fight in the deep eastern part of Ukraine or in Crimea.
No, without a doubt, that's not going to happen. The president, rightfully, but the theory is right. But I don't know that you get up there and make an announcement to Putin in advance that we're not going to do that, and we're not going to do that. But he did make that announcement. Basically, here's the green light. Let me ask you about the Middle East so-called peace talks that have ended for now. John Kerry, I call him the Palestinian spokesperson, blaming both sides the same. He's saying that neither side both sides have been, reluctant to make moves. But clearly, the Palestinians will never recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Arab League just a few weeks ago said they will never recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Israel's released 3 sets of Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have killed women and children in Israel. And the boss basically has done nothing.
Well, but here's the thing on the release of prisoners. That was what and it surprised me, as it did you, I'm sure. Netanyahu agreed to that.
Oh, it's disgusting.
And the Palestinians agreed to, take no action toward going to the UN and bringing the Israelis into the International Court of Justice, etc. But what happened, according to Kerry, is that the fourth release of prisoners, I think Netanyahu balked because he had troubles in his own cabinet with Naftali Bennett, among others. And then after they refused to release him, as Kerry said, 3 or 4 days, the Israelis, I think foolishly in my judgment, announced 700 new settlements, and Kerry said that was poof, and the whole thing went out the window, and the Palestinians reacted. Look, I don't fault, let me say this, I credit Kerry for making the effort, even though I was skeptical all along, and I think he ought to hang in there, because I think both sides, where are they going if they don't get some kind of deal here? With regard to the point of Israel, I think you can get recognition of Israel. But if you say it's a Jewish state, many of the Palestinians say that means the Palestinians in Israel are second-class citizens, and we're not going to agree to that. So I think if it were the case of recognizing Israel, even Arafat, I think, signed on to that when he shook hands with Yitzhak Rabin, who was, in my view, a great man and whose loss was one of the worst blows to everyone in the Middle East.
Well, we only got 30 seconds. I'm sure I think they'll take that the state of Israel, but then their right of return will make it into a Palestinian state. And
I think the Israelis have a right to stand and say, look, there can be a token right of return, but we cannot bring 4 or 5 million people into our country and remake it into a different country, and we're not going to do that. And I think most everybody will stand by the Israelis. That's a legitimate demand.
All right. Hey, Pat, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
You take it easy, my friend.
You too. Pat Buchanan, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about this equal pay stuff that Obama is putting forth on the Steve Malzberg Show.
We don't just talk about the news, we talk to those making news. This is the Steve Malzberg Show.